Yeah, so first up we have the semi-stagnation of last call EIPs. This is a proposal by PandaPip, which is saying, suggesting that we move last call EIPs back into review if 6 months has gone by since the last call deadline. I don't know if anybody has any opinions on that. If you do, leave them in the pull request. Similarly, there's strengthened wording of status update PRs. This one looks like it limits the content in status change pull requests to only the status change. Again, if you have any comments, leave them in the PR. Then we have changes to final proposals. These are mostly formatting changes. I don't think there's anything we need to talk about here. Yeah, they're just formatting changes, so I'll take care of those. Then we have update EIP1, add numbering guidelines. If anybody wants to talk about anything, just jump in, by the way. I'm kind of just steamrolling through these.
These seem non-controversial, not worth having an opinion on personally.
Yeah. Okay.
This one, I was hoping people who have already been dogfooding this, because I noticed on the Discord there were EIP authors already asking for access to a Google Sheet and stuff. Is anyone who's working with those authors reviewing this to make sure it's clear enough? Or maybe none of them are on the call.
I don't think any of them are on the call yet.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have some comments for this one, but I don't think PandaPip is here, so I don't think there's any point in me talking about them.
Okay.
I will leave them on the pull request. Then we have the split. Yeah, and that's probably the rest of the meeting there. So I have nothing to say about the split. Everything I wanted to say has been said. So I'm just gonna sit here until people who want to argue show up.
Also, people who want to say anything other than arguing are also welcome to volunteer. Like if just operational stuff. If this should be updated because of anything that's happened in the last 2 weeks, might be a non-confrontational way to proceed.
Let me say what's non-controversial for me, although it may be controversial for others. The one thing that's just absolutely blocking for me is that we remain a single autonomous editorial organization. Splitting up the organization into more than one editorial organization just is not at all what I signed up for, as it were. It's not at all the vision that we were working for back in, I guess, 2017, 2018. So it's partly that, and partly just that I don't see any good coming of taking the various conflicts among the editors, creating more than one organization, and getting to argue the same issues in more than one organization, getting different answers in different organizations, and trying to handle all that. We need one organization, and that's just bottom line for me. I have strong opinions on the rest, but I can probably live with the consensus.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, in the end, it's really just editing documents. So I don't think we need two different organizations to manage editing documents in Ethereum.
Um, well, in terms of like how the conversation has evolved over the 2 weeks, like I dove into this PR for a little while and commented on some threads, and I saw a lot of, you know, I saw 48 separate commits. You know, this has been, you've been putting in a lot of time fine tuning this, which I really appreciate. I think one thing I noticed in the last 2 weeks, sort of an option I personally didn't realize 4 or 6 weeks ago was an option, was to have a very strong working group notion, like to interpret working groups not as one-off topics for like individual EIP, but like standing bodies. Like the core devs could be a working group, and wallet implementation group could be a like a permanent working group. Do you think that that option might be under specified? Like, do people realize how different the thing is they're describing as a working group when they talk on this? Yeah, NFTs. I clearly, like, NFTs are like half the PRs on the repo, so they should be talking to each other. It'd be great to force all the NFT people to talk to each other. Yeah, I mean, do you feel like that might be a way to make some progress whittling down the, like, building common ground, if people understood this idea of still being one entity but having more sort of like status change power until review or until final, staying within the working group or something?
That's a fairly loose notion at this point.
Okay.
Clearly there could be some groups that are pretty ad hoc. Their job is done. No reason to stick around.
True.
The notion of a higher level group that's less ad hoc, that keeps a higher level group, the CL teams, the EL teams, we don't expect to not have teams at that level. They can certainly split off smaller teams when they want to. And clearly protocol is different than applications. They're running on a schedule, they've got to coordinate, and once something's on the main net, it's on the main net. There's no going back. But yeah, what I've suggested is nowhere near as it hasn't been laid out or reviewed nearly as much as the current split proposal. So pretty much I've simply made suggestions. Part of that PR is just, here's low-hanging fruit. Here's good things we could have without splitting. And then if we can't come to consensus on those, it doesn't seem like splitting will help that a whole lot. And I just don't see how it helps. So you can get two groups to argue about those things and have trouble with them still. And I'm nowhere near enough of an expert on GitHub and how the bot works and how people try to use GitHub, but I don't see the point of a two-way split. If I look at, as Dano left, unfortunately.
I think he said he was coming back at 4:30. I think he had to pop out to another meeting.
4:30. Okay.
guessing. Oh,
what
sorry,
are-
I'm on
what?
CEST.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. We should just talk UTC and never mention that.
Server time. Yeah,
Um,
he said at the 10-minute mark he'd be back at the 30-minute
as
mark.
as refactoring, it's sort of, I just really see three pieces there. And we're splitting it in two. And it's true that what we classify under EIPs has a certain status that's more than ERCs because it is the protocol. There'd be nothing else without the protocol, and if the protocol's not working, nothing else works, etc. So looking at my EIP, I'd be pretty happy to replace a lot of where I'm giving privileges to the core devs. I'm giving privileges to working group to just say, I'm giving privileges, we are giving privileges to the core devs, and we'll consider down the line whether a particular working group should have that level of privilege. But some way for the working groups to be able to handle and the core devs being able to handle the status changes in their workflow without having to push back on the editors and keep complaining that last call is in the way, and have to come back to us if they change something. It's the editors shouldn't care where it is as to considered for implementation. Is it going onto the test nets? All of that. That's not our problem. We're editors, we're publishers. And the main EIPS repo has been the repo that the editors have been working in and publishing documents out of for years now. That we've granted authors, I think, sort of the privilege of being able to edit directly in that repo. And I think at this point, we've got so many proposals, even on the EIP side, that that's unworkable. We're just getting too many notifications for too much stuff on too many documents. So even from that point of view, it just seems to make sense to get most of the editing flow out of the editor's repo. In other standards bodies, the working groups pretty much handle the documents up until it's time to present them to the whole community, or whatever part of the community is actually cares, and actually get them finally published. And in some other groups, the working group has a lot more say over the actual format of the documents. If motivation, reference, rationale is just not an appropriate format, fine. The editors aren't concerned about that, but if you tell us what your rules are, we'll review for that. Things like that. These are not precise. They're just things to put on the table as, instead of the split, it's basically we need to split things up. So what's the best way to split them? And things have gotten very polarized, I think, because we're just considering the split. So even if we want to split them up, we're arguing over this single way to do it, when there's really a broader range of possibilities. So that's sort of my take on it. Trying to be as calm as possible. Things have gotten pretty heated. And I've gotten pretty heated because I've just put a lot of work into this over the years, and breaking up the editors group is just sort of, I wake up with nightmares from it. That's what it means to me. So
Yeah. Okay, well, definitely. Thanks for pushing on this and trying to iterate this so much over these weeks. I see the participant list keeps changing. I guess people's conflicts are over. Hi, Dano. Did you want to talk about this this PR or other topics?
The pain relief PR. I came a
Yeah.
little late. I had another work meeting that I had to also attend, so I'm double booked.
Of course.
So one of the high level concerns I have with looking at yet another approach is we've been in the cycle of looking at yet another approach for years. And it never comes to fruition. It never actually gets to the final step. We talk about it, we argue the benefits and the drawbacks, and no action ever happens. So that's one of the reasons why I advocate just going straight for the split, leaving the editors in two different groups. You could join whichever group. You could probably even join two groups. People have disagreements on that, but I don't see the problem of joining both groups, and they could even coordinate on standards together. But the key thing is its action. And there's, the more we talk about it, the less likely we are to ever see consensus specs in an EIP form. We need to act now, or else they're going to passively split, and that passive split is going to look like an execution layer specs also leave an EIP process. And that is not a good outcome. So the pain relief, yes, let's do all these pain relief steps, but that does not remove the need from the split. This is not a mutually exclusive proposal, I think.
Agreed.
Yeah. Maybe another way of, maybe a follow-up question would be, what is still I mean, is this PR in draft, or is every little nit sorted? I mean, because this looks, I'm not seeing anything I have opinions on still open. I don't understand much the linting part, but other than that, it seems like this could be merged, and that would help close some of the gap between people. Is there remaining stuff that should be added or changed?
I still think the EIP ERC split should be resolved first before we merge this.
Oh.
And then we can merge this second after it splits. And the reason is because the split was proposed first. The split is what predicated these. And the conclusion from the all core devs engineers, we had a meeting last week, we talked about it. We asked, does anybody feel any different, multiple times? And what the group being served there wants is two different repos. So once we get to two different repos, I think we can look at these pain reliefs and see what's relevant to the ERC group versus the EIP group. For example, I don't think the protocol group really needs the working group structure, but I think the working group structure would be immensely beneficial to the ERC set of ones. You know, we get one for DeFi, we get one for wallets, we get one for smart contract patterns. I think those would be immensely beneficial for those organizations. But the all-core devs group kind of has their own setup that isn't really quite working groups. And it's kind of a square peg round hole thing there. They have a process, and they just need to reflect in the documents they produce.
That's what a working group is.
Sorry, Dano. You while you were in your other
I don't
meeting,
know
we
where
were
Dano
discussing
came
this a
in.
little. Yeah, sorry, he missed that whole conversation. Like my question, like actually, I think just after you dropped was, hey, I saw on I think it was Discord conversation, not GitHub conversation, the idea that maybe all core devs is like a standing working group that's like slightly more official or long term or has different privileges than a more lightweight working group that might be topical. And we've been sort of kicking around this idea that like, can a working group run a repo? I don't know.
So my concern is that's going to set the working group standard for the ERC side of the house too high, because we have weekly meetings, we have very specific processes, we have very nailed down processes. And so the other groups coming in think, well, we can't compete with that, so we just won't form working groups. Or the working groups will form, and they'll be held against the standard that is completely impossible for them to meet. If they're in separate groups, they can set their own working group norms and standards. It might just be an email list. It might just be a group of people that review the PRs on a regular basis. When we grandfather in ACD as a working group, We set the working group standard immensely high, and no one's ever going to achieve that isn't producing protocol specs.
Maybe.
ACD hasn't created a working group. They've created an entirely separate process.
Right.
That's what a working group is.
So why do we need a third group above us? I think was the other discussion that was on Discord. There's like basically little to no value. And one of the concerns that I got in the chat from one of the other engineers who was in all core devs was, we don't want a hierarchical group over us. And third group sounds like hierarchy. We don't want hierarchy. What is needed is a peer relationship between ERC and EIP, and not a hierarchical group above them.
We need a peer relationship between the editors, the core developers, and the many developers in the community. I said, I think while you were gone, at this point, as I understand things, I am not opposed to a split. It's, as you say, like a software refactoring. Having decided to refactor, I want to get it right. And I don't think that's a two-way split. I think it's a three-way split, at least. Just get out of EIPS, which is where the editors have been working for years. It's the directory we work in and where we publish, but it's also gotten cluttered up with all of the editing for all of the IPs. And we've set standards on workflow as well as editorial concerns. And workflow is none of our business. The core devs should have complete control of their workflow. We can work with the editors as to the best way to express that in headers, status fields, whatever. But doing a split,
that's what core
you know,
devs don't want. They don't want someone else telling us what headers to put in and what format to put it in.
that's what I just
We want
said.
jurisdiction to begin and end there.
That's what I
For
said.
editing and everything, there's nothing above core devs that says you can't publish this.
Then you should just form your own editors group and be done with us. If you don't want to,
That's what the split's attempting to do.
and that's the core of it.
Then you don't need our consent to do it,
I-
right?
That is my block, that there be a single group. It's not a hierarchy issue unless you make it one. Once you've done the split, then you get the question of how do we handle the hierarchy that we just created?
When we discuss our needs on all core devs, and then you say, you can't do that, we'll discuss that in another meeting, you've made it a hierarchy issue.
What can I say to that?
That's what we're reacting to.
We've got independent. Okay. I don't want to use emotional terms here, but it's the clearest analogy. You were sort of saying, rather than a clean split, we've got a contentious divorce. And to me, I'm sorry, it feels like a hostile takeover. That I hear these complaints and we need to coordinate better. You know, I think we need some process where the core devs can say things like, this has to go to final. And I don't know what that looks like, but some sort of appeal to deal with that.
And that's where we lose devs. That's where we have lost authors that have sworn off the process.
How does having one repo really help?
It's not the repo, it's the jurisdiction. It's where we can say in all core devs, okay, this has been implemented for years in the clients. Let's just go straight to final. And no one from another group can say, no, you can't do that. You have to go to 2-week final call and see if anybody has any more comments. All the clients are there. Everyone who implements it is there. They've had a year to comment it. Just because we didn't go through a process checklist to ensure that it goes to final, and we did that quickly on the call to make sure that everyone didn't have an objection, that's the autonomy that we need in the process.
That's the autonomy I think you should have. That the last, basically, I'm hearing there shouldn't be a last call. I'm going, no, there shouldn't be. We need those stages for ERCs because they're not currently organized enough to hand over to DRC to say, what's your process? So we have sort of a default process. The core, we shouldn't say what their process is. They come in pretty early just to sort of snag a number and say, here's a graph we're working on. After that, the stages are up to the devs. Final happens when something is finally on the mainnet, it's final. If there's some delay in finally getting that documented and some back and forth, it isn't in the way of getting it on the mainnet. Whatever your last spec is that you worked from for actually getting the upgrade done, that's all the document you need to actually get it onto the mainnet. So any of working out
But
any of this
what we're
stuff is later.
what we're dealing with
Um,
is authors who have been subject to that process and now have zero trust of any outside authority on that and won't contribute.
If
So we
you,
can say, honest, we'll never do it again, but they'll say, I'll believe it when there's a structure to protect me.
well, then the editors should resign and tell the core devs, we will no longer publish your things if you feel that you should be the publishers of them and not let anybody else have any say over that. You can fire us as publishers and create your own group. And on core dev meetings, you can argue over link policy.
Maybe just to interject.
We're
is-
getting in, yeah. We're getting to a level of detail I wanted to avoid.
I guess I'm just wondering what how could we still be talking past each other if Greg is saying you could set your own status to final without the broader group, and Dano is saying that still feels like an authority over rather than a facilitation role.
So what does this third group do then? I mean, we can set the repo and set it up, but I want boundaries and expectations, what their role is. And if they have, and if ERC and EIP has full right to ignore anything that the editors group imposes on them, then I want that written into the documents of the founding group.
Just to be clear, when you say third group, do you mean
the Ethereum PM, the combined editors between the ERC and the EIP side?
Got it. Okay.
So if they are strictly advisory in role to these two processes, and the processes are free to ignore their advice, then that sounds like, you know, how a third group could exist, but that needs to be explicit, not implicit.
Okay, let me lay out how I'm seeing this. These are possibilities. I don't want to get into this, well, what ifs. Sorry. There's the workflow and there's the editorial standards. If we mix up the discussion on those, we don't solve either one, I don't think. The workflow, for the most part, should not be part of the editorial process. It just shouldn't. We've set up a default workflow, and we need that for the ERCs because there is no standing group to handle any of that. For the core developers, there is. I think you missed some of this discussion, so I'm trying to repeat myself more briefly. For the core devs, they are different from the ERCs in an important way, which is there wouldn't be an Ethereum without the protocol. And once something goes on the mainnet, it's there. The behavior of the mainnet pretty much defines the protocol. So the document does need to describe that. but it doesn't need to be inside the editorial process, I don't think. And the intent, I'm sorry, but the intent back, back circa 2017, 18, I think into 19, but I don't want to get a calendar out, was that basically things went to the devs in draft state, and they came back in final state. And what happened in between wasn't the editor's business. And somehow these stages started getting pulled into the editorial status stages. So to some extent, I feel we're just arguing about the use of a status field.
And let me, maybe this would help. What if, so you said that working groups as sort of self-governing as all core devs should have full reign to add and subtract headers, change the options about what a status can be. What if all core devs had a status called almost final, and going from almost final to final were just a matter of like, let's make sure this is, documented in a way that's really future proof and can just be an immutable, can go into IPFS and be useful for 5 years. And that were the only sort of distinction, so that if that process takes too long every once in a while, everyone in all core devs is like, oh, we already put it at almost final. We already put it at what we consider in our working group final. So like, that's just something that 1 or 2 people are pushing that last inch of the way for archival reasons. Would that be within what's imagined by this
Yes.
PR?
Yeah, that's what was imagined years ago.
Okay.
So I think on the core dev's current workflow, there would be a document, call it the mainnet document, which would be a stage of the EIP where there's consensus that this is what is going into the next upgrade. So there's a document everybody's working from. It may or may not meet editorial standards, but that's not the point. The point is that the devs understand it and can use it to coordinate. Once it's on the mainnet, we do want to publish a description of the behavior of the mainnet. By that point, we should have a working executable specification, working clients, and the mainnet spec, and the final can be produced. If there's some delay, it's not a big deal. If there's disagreements over editing standards, they can be worked out. So we need that. We need some sort of process for collaborating. I don't think the editors should be in the way of the core devs. I understand that I do understand as a dev that you don't want the editors in control of whether you can ship. And you don't want to just hit a wall if there's a disagreement about, stuff as stupid as, whether am I allowed to links to something.
So in that sense, that going from what I'm playfully calling the almost final step to the final step is really more of a service to the other 2 working groups that are downstream, right? Like, you want to have a version that's canonical and permanent, so that when people are designing wallet interfaces or Solidity interfaces, they have the final. It's sort of like so then editorial's role in that last step is less about making sure all core devs passed the right thing, and more about making sure that what all core devs passed is documented well enough to be like unambiguously helpful to everyone else. So that makes it more of a coordinating role between the 3 sort of layers of the stack.
I
So
don't see why that needs to coordinate across all of the layers, though. Like,
It doesn't.
right? So what? I don't really understand the argument here. Like, what is
if it
the
doesn't, why have it?
difference that we have?
There wouldn't be an issue without the split, but, and I keep saying, at this point, as I'm coming to understand it, I'm not against a split. It's like, yes, we need to refactor things, but as a software engineer looking at refactoring, if someone comes in and says this has to be refactored, and here's how we are going to do it, and I look and go, this refactoring doesn't seem right. You've taken three things, lumped two things together, and it's still a problem. And
What is the problem?
the problem is that we have a repo. We've been working in that repo for years, and the editors use that repo to do their work. And then we do a split so that this repo becomes both the place where the editors work and the place where only EIPs are done. And somehow the core developers feel some direct ownership over it, which it makes it pretty unclear who the editors are and what their role is. And then we move the ERCs out, and then they're suddenly abandoned. It's not clear what their place in the process is. And I'm just going, the editors are the editors. We've given people the privilege of being able to edit directly on our repo. And by this point, there's simply too many documents for that to be workable. Even on the core side, there's just too many documents, and people don't need on that repo to be seeing so many changes in the documents. The core devs need their own repo where they can take a document all the way through to the mainnet without the editors having anything directly to say about it.
I mean, I don't understand why you are just kind of coming up with this, saying this is what they need. They told us what they wanted and what they felt they needed. They just want to have the repo focused on core EIPs and separate the applications out. That's what the group of all core devs said. But instead, you are taking that.
Work for the core devs. Now you're putting the core devs on top of the editors.
There's no EIP editing without the core devs.
Yes, there could be.
There's no Ethereum without the core devs.
That's true. But
so
in the discussions, I'm seeing people talking, complaining about decentralization, about hierarchy. And this sounds like the core devs. I mean, you took a PR to the core devs, and if you tell somebody there are problems, here's a PR that fixes them. Do you want us to fix it? They will, of course, say, of course, fix it.
Fix what?
Fix whatever problems you believe that splitting the repos will fix.
I mean, there's one problem that is very important to core devs that none of these things fix, and that's just being able to interact with the repo using the notifications just like they do for other repos. Like, no core dev watches the EIP repository anymore.
Right. And
because it's unusable.
Exactly.
They should be. Like, core devs should have an idea of like what standards are being proposed, how they're evolving. This is how they're used to working on the consensus layer specs, on the dev P2P repo, on the execution APIs repo. There's no reason that they shouldn't be able to do this for the EIP repo.
So what's the problem with the editors keeping the repo they've been working in and the core devs setting up a repo for managing their own workflow and documents?
We're not proposing splitting, getting rid of editors. That seems to be when we don't want the third group, that seems to be the undertone that core devs reject editors. We want editors, we want them split between the two groups. We want editors focusing on the needs of ERCs and editors focusing on the needs of EIPs. They have very distinctive, different needs and different things that need to be done with those two repos. So when we propose the split, we're not saying no editors, no standards, nothing that can't be put on an IPFS link for 5 years. We still want that. We just don't see what value a third group over both of them has. They can both create high quality standards independently. There's nothing about unifying the processes that magically makes it better.
Well, I know you don't seem to like the analogy and you want me to break it down in huge detail, but the ITF manages standards for the entire internet with a single
The
editor.
ITEF does not have a board of editors. It has a director, it has areas, and those areas have working groups. Working groups have a chair and one editor per working group. So there is no, centralized editor group doing this. The editors within each working group have independent full control over it. So unless you can show me what the higher levels of the IETF would add to the situation that is not just overhead and frustration, I don't know how any IETF comparisons really matter, because we're not really doing IETF process, which is a very email heavy driven process.
They have more process. They're a much bigger group. The standard and working groups are, and I think in a similar way, the developers, yes, if you feel a need in managing your workflow to set up somebody, typically the project manager has done a fair amount of this, to say, these are the standards we need to enforce for our documents, fine. But the chief editor and staff there in the ITF have become more bureaucratic, but they do set standards for just your basic editorial stuff.
There's nothing stopping us from having this at some point. Like, I'm not against this structure fundamentally, but we just don't have enough people. We don't have a need for this right now. We can't even get the other 3 editors to show up on this call. We have, basically 3 editors. There is no need for another group to manage the 3 of us. Like, we just need a group chat.
I think maybe I'm actually proposing a working group at IETF as we speak. So like I have all of this fresh in my memory. 2023 IETF process is something I can actually speak to off the top of my head. But I think that maybe Dana made a good point that the area groups are standing working groups, and working groups are sort of topical, chartered, short-lived, and the area groups each have an editor who sort of coordinates within the area group, within the multiple working groups, and the area groups coordinate amongst each other with dispatch to make sure all new items only go to one area group, don't create redundant working groups within or across area groups. So like, I do think that function, it's sort of like, I think that what Dano just said in terms of like maybe one editor per, let's just call them area groups, right? Let's just say ERC, EIP, and wallets are area groups, and there's 3 of them. This 4th group, whatever we want to call it, I really don't, I think that if anyone in any of the 4 groups thinks that 4th group is the overarching hierarchy or the final say or the ultimate authority, doomed to fail, will never work. We aren't ITF. We aren't big enough. There aren't enough hands to justify that, right? I think all those points are totally valid. I just think coming from like a project management and coordination community background, I see that 4th group as the core of like almost administrative function that just helps that group chat of the editor in each area group work, right? It's like the dispatch function and the just avoiding redundancy, avoiding seeing conflict in advance function. And I'm more like, I'm just advocating for that, not even out of any like personal agenda here or history. Like, I'm new here. I just do this in other contexts, and that just strikes me as like the baby that I fear will get thrown out with the bathwater. If that fourth group is in any way the overarching authority over the other three, I agree it won't work. Like, all core devs does not want anyone above it, and that's fine. I think we need to just find a common ground on like what form of that fourth group would work for everyone.
Well, I think what we really need to consider is what points of authority, I don't know if there's a more formal term for it or not, but what points of authority exist in the system. So like, for example, core developers have the authority to choose where they publish their documents and where they read their documents from. And EIP editors have the authority to decide what pull requests get merged in their repository. And those are really the only 2 points of like power in this entire system. Everything else is just, it's imaginary, right? Like, you know, all core devs can say that they're our peer, we have a peer relationship with them or whatever. It doesn't matter. Our authority is over pull requests, like our actual authority is over pull requests in the EIP's repository, and core devs' actual authority is, where they read their documents and where they publish their documents to. And like, I don't think we need to think of anything outside of those 2 like decisions. Do all core devs use the EIP's repository to publish stuff? Yes, no. And, what rules do EIP editors have for merging stuff into our repository? And I think those are the only questions we really need to answer.
And because we have only 7 minutes, I wanted to get to like client's question about meeting cadence. And this is a good example. Like, if there was a coordination group that included, hopefully at every meeting, one editor from each of the area groups, it might need to meet more often, but maybe it would only need to have more participation from the entire all core devs or wallet devs or EIP devs every 4th meeting or every 8th meeting or something, because then you could just sort of schedule for that meeting everything that needs more detailed or wider review. I don't know, but I'm not. I'm totally hijacking like client's agenda item. Like client, I think you were just talking about quarterly meeting. Full stop. I don't know what else.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm just pretty frustrated that we come onto these calls. We don't ever get Panda on here. For some reason, Victor's kind of stopped coming. We're talking about like the most important topics related to EIP editing right now. Can't even get them to like really interact.
Victor's getting his wife to the doctor this morning. He very much.
Okay. Okay.
Moving it,
all things
moving
there.
it
Okay.
quarterly doesn't necessarily help, but let's not get into like that's not an important issue for today.
I mean, it is like, this is insane. The number of meetings that we have.
As long as our meetings have agenda items that we're discussing to the last possible minute, I don't think we can reduce meeting frequency. I don't think that's going to solve any problems.
I mean, the fact that we have
available, let's be honest.
Exactly. The fact that we have these meetings, we have all of these debates, like we don't make any progress in these debates. We've been talking about numbering for like years, and we still fill EIP meetings with them.
That's not a meeting thing, though. That's just somebody needs to implement the bot. That's like, we've all like, that discussion's been decided. We're doing a bot. It's going to happen eventually when we get around to it.
This meeting could be an email most of the time, or a discussion on pull requests. If editors are unable to just like respond to pull requests in a timely manner, then that's like a bigger problem. But I don't want to come on here every 2 weeks and debate, should we add BIP? Should we add, whatever, new links? This is just like a total waste of time, and we can't even get most of the editors to come. And I am like frustrated that I come every 2 weeks almost, and the rest of the editors come whenever it's convenient for them. So they can, and especially because Panda is the one who's creating most of these changes, and we have to come on and debate his changes, but he doesn't even show up.
I think that might be a signal of an orthogonal and also very serious problem, which is that if the coordinating body that is supposed to be helping other processes is holding back other processes, that's like a funding issue. Like like you're doing this on top of your day job, but everyone's doing this on top of their day. Like no one's being paid to attend these meetings every 2 weeks is like its own problem. Okay, sorry, bad example. But like if if this were someone's job and they were holding up the processes that are supposed to be enabling, then we would say like, you are bad at your job. We need a new person to sit in your role. But like, maybe that's a sort of structural issue to like where the money comes from to keep this process going, that the timeline is that it's
We're not doing important enough stuff to be paid that much money. We don't need to pay 5 full-time people to do this. We don't need to pay anyone full time. If I like being
as
honest,
someone who gets paid full time to do this for other orgs, I disagree. But go on.
That's my number one concern about a third organization is it'll become a trophy job, and it won't provide actual value. If I can be shown that this provides actual value, that above and beyond simple collaboration between 2 groups, then that would be persuasive to me. But I'm concerned that a third group is just going to be a trophy job.
like we haven't really figured out what this job does outside. We haven't figured out what this job does versus like what Tembeco does.
What's
like Tembeco looks like an editor in some ways. He looks like somebody who's in charge of, organizing a group, an area group. And it makes sense. Like he does a lot of work. He does a lot of work, like coordinating things. And this is like, not something that editors do at all by design.
Right. But it's not an editing job to say we're considering this for inclusion. It's not an editing job to say it's time to put it on the test nets. It's not an editing job to say, yes, we've decided we're going to put this into the next upgrade. And it doesn't need to be an editing job to keep those directly in the editing status. That's what I'm saying. The core devs need to be able to just do that. And if we're in the way, we mostly should just get out of the way. And we do need some process for coordinating on that. But just saying we have one repo, that's where both the editors and the core devs are going to work. And we're going to create the CRC repo, and it's an awful lot less clear to me. Who's going to manage that? Are we going to wind up with like just Victor trying to run that whole thing?
I mean, I'll be an editor on it too, and I'll go and try and review some of the ERCs. But
we take
if you need volunteer work, I'll volunteer too.
So then, who takes care of? We take a small struggling group of people, we split it into 2 groups, and we'll have 2 small struggling groups of people. And then
we're not struggling.
Yes,
we have editors who have enough time to just write, multi-paragraph essays rebutting other editors. Like we have time. We just need to apply it to editing EIPs. We've got ERCs sitting there that haven't been looked at in months. But instead, all of the editors are sitting here arguing about numbering and about how to deal with the process. We're not even surveying the community.
You've moved the overtime window. I think it's pretty clear that right now we are wanting to solve this. We're all tired of this discussion.
You're the one who's extending this discussion.
Yes. Yeah, I said up front that the only thing that's an absolute block for me is dividing up the editorial organization into multiple organizations.
I mean, personally, I don't see why this is a problem, but I honestly don't really care that much about this point. I want to split the repos. If we have to have I don't know what it means. If we have to have an organization that goes above the 2, that I don't really care, because I don't think this organization does that much. But I don't want to then spend the next 3 months trying to figure out what the processes are going to be for that organization, what the constitution is going to be for that organization. I like splitting them both because you could just clone both of the repos, clone the processes, and then let them run.
Yeah, we're running into some fundamental disagreements, and going around in these meetings isn't helping. They may be fundamental enough if the other devs, if the other editors, if the other editors want to go with the split, the split, not a split, okay. But I'm just hearing just fundamental disagreements as to how the editors should be relating to the developers. And that's the blocker for me. The editors need to remain a single autonomous organization. And I'm also tired of arguing about that. And that's what I've just sort of laid down. That's a longstanding intention. I see no good coming from breaking it up. I'm not interested in participating in the process of breaking things up and having an organization I helped create split up in pieces. And I can keep arguing about it.
You were
This
not
point-
in the original editor list.
For crying out loud. After a few years, Axic joined. I went in to edit EIP1 to add his name, and I looked and said, gee, my name's not an EIP1. Spent a long time. I should probably put it in. You'd have to go find the old Skype logs to figure out when I first joined, if they're even still there and complete. I don't know. As to whether I started in 2016 or 17, Hudson might remember. Nick Johnson would remember perhaps, but he's pretty much moved on.
I acknowledge you're the oldest serving member, but you were not one of the founders of the process. So that's what I object to.
Fine. This.
I gotta go to the EOF meeting, guys.
Fine. I wasn't in the big house in Switzerland, which is the true founders. But
I think the fundamental question for me, just as a newcomer, as an outsider walking in on this family dispute, it seems to me like it's actually kind of important how these. So I've been doing open source for a long time. I've been trying to coordinate processes across companies for a long time. It seems to me like part of the issue here is that core devs have pretty conventional employment relationships, and it is their full-time job to advance one of those three working groups within that area group in Dano's analogy, execution APIs or whatever. And because of that, this feels like some weird external process outside of their job, outside of their company, outside of their colleagues, outside of their sort of specialists who are all focused on this, on company style timelines. And
so to give more color on that, I would say
Yeah.
we would expect client teams to spend time in the EIP process, maybe possibly promote an editor there to make sure things facilitated and pushed through, because the EF has people in protocol pushing it through. And if you're going to be proposing changes to it as part of your job is to write EIPs. It wasn't built as an independent thing that should have independent standing like the IETF. It was built as a facilitator in a formal process to help these protocol things go forward and to serve the community.
Mhm.
My concern is what Light Client was saying before he left to go to his meeting that I should probably be on.
sorry.
Is that we're spending time not serving the community, but fighting about our own standards, and we're not spending time reviewing EIPs and ERCs coming from the communities, which should be the purpose of it. We're too busy worried about structure and format to serve the communities it's set up to serve. And that's one of the things I think the ERC split will do. ERCs handle just ERCs, EIPs handle core protocols, and all of the minutia of people, the app developers don't want this thing for the protocol and their process. So great, let's split them up. And that's the core win for the process. And it's easy to split them now. And if a third group needs to form after we do this split, because there's value to be added and can be demonstrated, we're fine with that. We just don't think that should be predicated on a split. Split now, let things figure out what need to be done. And let's focus on serving the communities rather than arguing about what our jobs are and whether we should be paid. Because if we do a good enough job, the pay will follow. Some company will hire us, or there will be formal funding for this process. That's always been the mantra of Ethereum, is get in and work. And if you've really found something valuable, there's a company that has an empty slot that does what you do. So that's kind of where we've been. Maybe we're growing past that part where we need to have it. I don't think we're quite there yet. Maybe we'll be there, but I don't think that those issues should stop what needs to be done now, which is get core process separate from application process. They're very divergent communities and are continuing to diverge. The split among authors not participating has been happening for years and is about to come to the complete end. We're trying to stop that before it completely ends.
No, I take your point, but I'm wondering if if the original idea was for this process to facilitate, was the initial idea for those facilitators to be completely unpaid? Because that's like never that's where I'm confused. It's like, it's almost like this the problem isn't that volunteers write too long of PRs, it's that they're volunteers with no sort of incentive structure to make them, I don't know, structure a criteria of success around fast, happy communities they're serving.
So what these were based off of was the Bitcoin improvement protocol,
right,
as well as the Python improvement protocol. And that's kind of the heritage of this, more so than the IETF processes. And in those, there is no real paid editor. A lot of people work on Python. You know, to have your paid job be Python, you're not paid to work on Python. You're paid at Google to count ads, and they decide that it would be valuable for them to have somebody building core Python because it helps them build ads. I think that's more to the core of what it was originally founded on. And you look at all the list of the original founders, they were all either employed by the Ethereum Foundation, or they had companies that were building early Ethereum things built off of hopes and dreams rather than actual money. So that truly is the foundation of where this came from, is hopes and dreams, not a formal process, because IETF wasn't even founded until the mid 80s. It was just an RFC process back before the internet was, when it was an academic research process. And I think if we're going to compare the EIP process to the IETF process, I think we're still in the RFC land. We don't have yet a need for formal LLC around this process. I don't think we're large enough yet. I don't think the community is large enough yet. I want to get it there. And the way we need to get it there is, and I'm serious, I will volunteer if there's a need for people on the ERC side. I'll do it on the EIP side, but I don't think that's where the shortage is going to be. I will volunteer to help review these and get these through the processes if that's what's needed to grow it, because the process needs to serve the community, does not serve the editors.
I mean, my only disagreement with anything that's been said today is that we're making no progress, because just attending the last 4, it feels to me like each of these meetings, the gap seems smaller between everyone's definition of success. I mean, it sounds to me like I've just been talking to people in other corners of the universe about like the wallet stuff primarily. For me, that's the 4th group that should exist. But like, it kind of seems win-win for everybody if the wallet is the working group and the core devs are a working group, and the sort of like one volunteer, like the way you described it as like one multi-editor, each would have at least one editor, but definitely one editor that also coordinates with the other groups. Like that's, so I mean, if that's pre-IETF, that sounds right to me. I'm not worried about whether or not we're as complicated as IETF.
From my perspective, for this third group, this group on top to succeed, it can't be forced as a function of the split. It needs to naturally grow out from ACD and from the EIP process, from the ERC process, and from the wallet process, and grow up and show and find the gaps that can't be filled from simple coordination that requires the organization. I think the need needs to require the org rather than the org searching for a need. That's my concern. If we create this, that it's not really going to solve any problems. We're just going to shuffle where the problems are. This is a bold move that we need to just separate it, and it is absolutely a leap of faith. But if there is a need for a third group, then it'll be apparent that this is what we need, and the people that see it will come together and build it on top of it. But I honestly think right now that just email coordination and PR coordination in each group will still have high standards and still have high processes. Do they necessarily need to be the same and centrally coordinated? That's what I question. But if there's other values that come up from a third group, then that's where the value can be added.
So you keep talking about a third group, but we are here in the meeting of that third group being told that actually we shouldn't exist. We'll have two groups and then decide whether to put ourselves back together again.
Like Dr. Manhattan.
I guess I don't know the reference, but I'm an old
It's a
fogey.
Watchmen reference. The first thing, he's the only real superhero in the Watchmen. And the first thing he had to learn was how to put himself back together, and that made him stronger.
Well, there's no reason for me to think that we're superheroes.
Dr. Manhattan didn't.
But when I hear, let's make a bold move, and then, I guess I keep going, and then what? Maybe things will get better. Maybe they'll get worse. But you have moved the Overton window. I'm not trying to drag this out forever. I'm trying to get to a workable resolution for everybody. So.
But the only way we ever get progress on major issues is to move the Overton window, and that is the definition of dysfunctional. This is not the first time that the Overton window has had to have been moved. We have to do the end move to break this pattern. Otherwise, it's just going to become a continual series of one-upsmanship.
Right.
I'm 10 minutes late to the EOF call. I really should have done that.
Yeah, it sounds important. Don't worry. Thanks for staying after. I found it very helpful, at least. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure how to what final words are. I'll, I guess, try to mimic Pooja's minute note PR policy to close this off. Thanks, everyone.